This is the second part of a two-part episode. If you missed the first part, click here to go back and watch that. Now, onto the episode.
We live amid the greatest abundance of information any people has ever had. But survey after survey reveals an astonishingly low informational level among us. To be sure, the right to remain uninformed is one of the privileges of a democracy, but in a contest such as the one we are engaged in, it is one of the surest ways of losing our freedom.
In the early days of the printed word, most people were trying to make books more available to the public. While books were by no means a common commodity, after the invention of the printing press, they became more widely available to the public. Over the next 500 years, books began to pervade people's lives more and more. But then, with the advent of communism and a friendly neighborhood Vladimir Lenin, everything changed and books were suddenly being suppressed. I'm Daniel Seehausen, and this is the Answer Archive.
The communists knew very well that the printed word is powerful, and they did everything in their power to prohibit citizens living in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union from getting any kind of religious literature, any kind of news from the West, any publications of any kind that would have a different worldview, really, than what they had.
That's Dr. Barbara Elliott. She was a reporter in Europe during the waning days of the Soviet Union and personally helped refugees flee the USSR while interviewing them about their experiences behind the wall. When World War II ended, Germany was parceled up into a western and eastern half, with the UK, France, and the United States working together for the western half, and the Soviet Union having control over the eastern half. Oddly, even though Berlin was in the eastern half, because it was the capital, it too was divided. This led to all sorts of problems over the next 40 years, and as tensions rose from people immigrating from the east part of Germany to the west, the communists got antsy. Without warning, the Berlin Wall was erected in order to keep the East Germans inside the Soviet sphere of influence. It would stand for 28 years, keeping people from crossing between the two sides. Many people lost access to their family members, friends, and jobs. East Berlin had been segmented from the west almost overnight, but not everyone gave up on keeping knowledge flowing into the east.
They were really ingenious. There were mission organizations that would print things in the West and then smuggle them into the East. One of the groups that I worked with was called Licht im Osten, Light in the East. They had people in the West who would then drive up to the border, and they would have false sides in their vans, actually, and panels on the roof. And they would get to the border, and they'd unscrew these panels, and then they didn't even know the name of the people that they were meeting on, but they knew their faces. So then the person would pick it up there, and then they would put it into another outfitted vehicle and then, distribute them to the cities that they were going to.
During the Cold War, the world was divided in three: the first, second, and third worlds. It is easy to forget that the second world was the Soviet Union and its allied states. Today we use the term third world, forgetting that it comes from a time when nations were forced to choose. Were they on the United States side, the Soviet Union side, or neither? Third world countries were those who chose to remain neutral. It just so happened that many of these countries were poor. But it wasn't just people from the first world who brought books in. Others were busy printing them inside the Eastern Bloc, in the second world.
There were people who printed things there as well. All kinds of ingenious devices of printing presses that they concocted themselves. It was a kind of interesting system. What they did is put together printing presses that were composed of parts from washing machines and bicycles and kind of random chains, and they would make ink out of moss and melted tires, and it's just this amazing concoction. But they could disassemble this little printing press and put it into a suitcase, and they'd go into a city. They would darken all of the panels of a house and put up soundproofing around the doors, and in the middle of the night they'd print all these pages and then put them into pockets of the skirts of rather fleshy Russian women. Babushkas, right? And they're not going to get frisked getting onto a train. Who's going to frisk her skirt, right? So they would carry these printed pages then to the next city where they would get off, would disgorge all of the pages, and then someone else, a whole team of them working overnight, would stitch them together in homemade books. They're called samizdat, self-printed, self-constructed literature.
And though these dissident actions were dangerous for those who took them, it did cause change inside the USSR. The books told them of a better world and a better way to live. And often, the very people who were being oppressed would be the people who wrote things that caused change.
They printed all kinds of things. Václav Havel would write plays, and they would then be printed in the underground, and then they would be performed, and he would be rounded up and sent to prison. Whereupon he would write again, and somebody would print them, and then they would perform it, and then he would go to prison again.
Over time, knowledge of the outside world soaked throughout the USSR, and protests arose. Due to a variety of factors, from economic downturn to internal political strife, the Soviet Union eventually fell. A large part of the motivation for this movement was restoring freedom of speech. From the very first written word up to the modern day, books have held power. As we live in transforming times once again, it is worthwhile to remember where we came from. The internet has completely changed the way that we intake information. In times past, everything moved much slower. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, it was far easier for people to be uninformed. It's still imperative that we rethink the way that we correspond with each other, because how we communicate defines who we are. Hey guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please subscribe. My main source and interviewee for this episode was Dr. Barbara Elliott. In the description you can find a link to her publications. Make sure to support her, because she's pretty awesome. As always, I've been the writer and producer of this show, Daniel Seehausen, and my supervising producer is Joshua Sikora. If you want to know more or want to subscribe to the audio version of the podcast, just go to answerarchive.com. It's the hub for everything related to us. And again, thanks for watching.